But for tonight, again, I want to focus on Passover, since Passover is coming in exactly 2 weeks. And really, I want to draw 4 major lessons from the festival of Passover, which I think are most applicable to our daily lives. Lesson number 1 really goes to the very core of Passover, because it's interesting. Think about this, and I want you to put yourselves in the shoes of Moses, our ultimate leader, who took us out of Egypt. And thank God they finally crossed the border. They're out of Egypt. A nation of slaves is free. Moses needs now to address them. He addresses them, and one would think that he would speak about the virtue of freedom, that he would speak about the future, that he would speak about the map, maybe, the GPS, where are they going? But no, none of those. If you're in Moses' shoes, what do you speak of? This is your first opportunity really to address a nation of slaves that has just been freed after 210 years. Come on, what do you speak of? What's the topic?
Freedom.
Freedom, right? Okay, all right. Why doesn't speak about freedom? What else? Propose something else. Rebuilding, good. The new roles. Future. None of this. He speaks about hope, okay. None of that either.
Being thankful they made it.
Being thankful, gratitude, none of that. None of that. First speech. Food, okay, that's not bad. Well, matzah is mentioned, yes.
Where's the
But
bathroom?
actually, it has a lot to do with food. Yes, Julie? Okay, all right. Speak about the people they left behind, the new journey, the past, the present, the future.
The feast.
Okay, well, yes, close. He speaks about the feast, but not really the feast. He asks everyone there to go home. He all of a sudden has their attention, but instead of capitalizing on this moment, he says to them, no, there's no need to gather now. You go home. But 1 second, there's a nation of slaves that's thirsty for a message, that's confused, that just left slavery for after 210 years. They don't know what they're doing. They have this mentality of slavery also. Give them some hope, give them some freedom, give them a good message that will uplift their spirit. None of that. Moses says to them, sorry, we can't gather now. Go home. Ish leveit avot, ish labayit. Everyone is to go home, and there in your homes, offer a sacrifice, which will then be called the sacrificial lamb or korban pesach, and eat it with your families. Why? You have this opportunity to share a message of hope, of something uplifting, but none of that. Why? Why would he do that? Yes, Julie. That's a good question. That's right. Where were their homes? So they had their own little tribal tents or little family tents, and that's how they journeyed also in the desert. But that's right. So that I would say that also enhances the question, because you tell them to go, they don't even have a home to go to. Maybe a little tent, but still, that's going to just increase their suffering, increase their confusion.
They have to eat them.
That they have to, yes.
But it's not.
Okay, good. But the Torah hasn't been given yet. So these rules are unclear, but you're right. They were, how to shecht, how to sacrifice the lamb. That they learned, though, just before they left, because one of the commandments was to take a lamb from the Egyptians. Remember that? Tied to their beds for 3 days and then sacrifice it. And then with the blood, smear the blood on the doorpost. And that was really the final step before the grand exodus. So they had an idea of how to deal with lamb. But still, why give them this message when they are now finally free and they are thirsty for a leader who would come and inspire them? And the answer, I think, is very, very powerful. Let's jump to reference number 3 on the first page. The reference number 1 was this speech of Moses where he says to them, go home, and every family should have their own lamb, and so on. And reference number 2 is about this commandment that really stayed with us for all generations. Even today, when we have a Passover Seder, it is to commemorate the sacrificial lamb that was eaten by families throughout all generations from that time onwards. But reference number 3 here gives us the answer to this big question. Does anyone want to read? More than 3 millennia ago. Anyone? Please, Sarah.
Torah's teachings that the battle for society began at the home, the family, not the workplace, not the university, not the malls, not the battlefield, was the nucleus of civilization. The Torah understood that it is the home, in the loving embrace of the home, where the future of humanity is created.
Right, and this is why he told him to go home, because indeed he knew that he had to rebuild this nation. Maybe the slaves themselves didn't know yet, but he knew that he had to rebuild the nation. Where does the rebuilding begin? What's the foundation of any civilization? The home. The home is healthy, society is healthy. And therefore Moses says, go home, speak to your family members, go have a Seder together. You can fight, you can play together, you can work together, you can speak together, you can celebrate together. In that chemistry, that's where society will be rebuilt. Yes, Hannah.
I'm really confused. Moses spoke to them. I thought he couldn't speak.
Oh, he was stuttering. Yeah, but that's the enigma of Moses. His big excuse to God is that he can't speak, and then he becomes the speaker of all times. To the point that even the final book of the Torah of Moses, which is called Torah Moshe, is called Devarim, which means speech, to speak. But that's right. But he spoke, absolutely. He spoke many, many, many times. But that was really the big idea of Moses, which is really remains an idea that is so true, especially in our day and age, where the family unit, unfortunately, is so broken. And maybe because the family unit is broken, society is broken. If we were to focus on our own children, our own families, ensure that they are raised in the most healthy way, in the most loving way, in the most nurturing way, then society, I think, would look different. And there are statistics. This is not just big ideas or the idea of Moses. Science today agrees with this idea. This is one of the many, many hundreds, if not thousands of statistics. But here's an interesting research that they did about families who dine together, who actually have a Seder together, not just once a year, but at least a few times a week. These families are healthier families than the rest. Let's read the statistics. It's a fascinating research. Does anyone want to read? Please, go for it. Jackie.
Research examining 5,000 teenagers has shown that when children eat with their parents regularly, they are more likely to be emotionally strong and have better mental health. Teens who ate regular family meals were also more likely to be adjusted, have good manners and communication skills. The effect is not restricted to the children. Mothers who ate with their families, they were also found to be happier and less stressed as compared to mothers who didn't.
Right. So it goes both ways. It's not just for the children, but it's for the parents themselves. And that's very true. And unfortunately, in an age of distraction, the type of age we live in, we often overlook that which is the most important. Our very own children, our very own family members, our very own family unit. And if those were really focused on as they should be, then I think, again, society would look very different. But that was the message of Moses. Go home. You want to rebuild yourself? Go home. Build your home, and society will then be rebuilt. Yes.
That's interesting because, I mean, it's great. My husband passed like 16 years ago. So my little one was 15 and 15, 18, and 21. And I was fortunate enough that my husband was retired and worked from home. And we had at least 5 meals a week, if not more, really, together as a family.
Right.
And I really, really feel that the little time that they had with their father, with all of us, really, really implanted some really great morals.
Right.
We always had family dinner, even if it was bringing in pizza, whatever it was, but we always sat down for family meals, at least 5 days a week, and it really made a difference.
Absolutely.
I think the way my children are now.
Right.
You know, it's really
right.
very impactful.
Yeah, there's no doubt, and science backs that. Absolutely. Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Look, I have a dear friend, on a similar note, dear friend who was in the Israeli army, and he was severely injured in Gaza, in one of the Gaza wars, 2014 particularly. And he told me, thank God he recovered and he's doing well today. But he told me that he had a bullet that hit him on his shoulder and he started gushing blood uncontrollably. until someone came and saved him. But he had a few moments all by himself in which he thought he was going to die. And he started going back to, he said, well, if I'm going to die, let me die with the sweetest memories so I can die peacefully. And he started going back down memory lane to think of memories that really could comfort him. And he thought of memories of school that didn't quite comfort him, memories of his work that didn't. Then he went back to his childhood. And then he saw his parents, he saw his family dinners, he saw lessons and values that he received from his family. And that was the most comforting to him. And I think it's true. If we go back to those memories that anchor us in life, that give us that warmth and that love, I'm sure those will be the memories that were created in the confines of our home, because that's really where the foundation of life is found. Moses understood that best. Therefore, he tells them, go home. Yes. All right. Yeah. Yeah. That's so beautiful. There you go. There you go. Yeah. Yes, Marissa.
And when I was in middle school, my sister was in middle school. She was hospitalized with an eating disorder. And when she was like ready to come back, like the one thing she asked for is that we would have like family meals together.
Right. Beautiful. So beautiful. And I think that maybe, and that I don't know about, I didn't do enough research about this, but this is why there could be delicious foods out there, more delicious, at least, from a chemistry standpoint, or whatever, than the food that we have at home. But somehow we each drawn to the mother, to the food of our mother, to that gefilte fish, however disgusting it may be, to that matzo ball soup, for revolting it may be. But it's always those memories that warm us. And I think it's connected, of course, to the emotional aspect of that dinner, to the emotional aspect of that matzo ball soup or whatever it is that really brings us that comfort. Yes. Right. Yeah. Now you have to do it. I'm sorry. You're welcome. You're welcome. Your family will remember it though for centuries. Okay. All right. So that's idea number one. I want to speak about again 4 different ideas. That was lesson number 1, which I think is really so vital to internalize today. Lesson number 2 is how to deal with frustration. And we learn this from the story of the 10 plagues, the story that preceded the grand Exodus. And that's when Moses was already giving up almost on Pharaoh. And God tells him, go, continue to go, continue. But he's hard, but still continue to go. At one point, God says to Moses, you know what? Come to Pharaoh. Now, he should have said to him, go to Pharaoh, as he said to him in the past. What does it mean? Come to Pharaoh. And immediately the commentaries point out that in that verse where God commands Moses for I don't know how many times, to go to Pharaoh, when he tells him to come to Pharaoh, he was really alluding to Moses, don't worry. You think you're going to Pharaoh by yourself? You're wrong. Come to Pharaoh with me. I'll be there with you. Come, let's go together. That's why I use the word come to Pharaoh. Now, on a deeper level, Pharaoh represents, of course, the challenges. Maybe even the challenges with evil that we may have, but certainly the challenges with the difficulties that we may have in life. And very often, our response to those challenges is like the response that Moses had from time to time, where I can't deal with this anymore. This challenge is too big. It's too overwhelming. This difficulty is impossible to surmount. And then we hear God's whisper, who says to us, Baal Pharaoh, come, you're not alone. Come with me to Pharaoh. Come with me to that difficulty. I'm with you, and I'll ensure that if you give it your all, you indeed will be able to overcome it. That's really one way to deal with frustration that we learn from the story of our ancestors in Egypt. Let's read that in the references themselves. This is straight from the Zohar, the foremost book of Kabbalah. It's at the bottom of the first page, the very last reference there. Does anyone want to read it? Moses, please, Wendy, go for, and then after you, yeah, go ahead. You'll do the next one. Go ahead.
He was so afraid. That the infidel was unprepared. He don't live in spirit. I will come into the spirit. You are not alone. I will go with you.
Right. I think that's really one of the great ideas of faith and of life altogether, that if we realize that God is with us in every challenge, the challenges then all of a sudden do become surmountable. I think this is best described maybe in this cute story. I don't know if I've shared it before, but about this actor who would be on Broadway, and he would always conclude his show with Psalm 23, that famous psalm that says, God is my shepherd, I shall not lack, right? Lets me lie down in lush meadows. How does it go? Green pastures and so on. All right. Thank you. I know it in Hebrew. But he would sing it at the end of his every act, his every show, and people would give him this round of applause that was deafening. One day, after about 20 years of him doing this, he's approached by an old Jew who tells him, you know what? I know you do Psalm 23. If you don't mind, it's my favorite Psalm. Can I do it for you at the end of your show today? The man says, no, it's the greatest crescendo. It's the climax of my show. I can't let you do it. It's going to... He says, please, just let me justify. I've been doing this for 20 years. I'll let you do it tonight. After the show, he calls this old Jew to go and read Psalm 23, and he's afraid because it's not going to end the way he wanted it to end. Anyway, this man reads Psalm 23. God is my shepherd. I shall not lack. And at the end, everyone is crying. There's not one dry eye in that crowd. And the actor is amazed. So at the end, he goes to the old Jew and he says to him, I don't understand. People do give me a round of applause, but I've never had a reaction like this. That's just amazing. How did you do this? And the old Jew tells the actor, he says, that's the difference between me and you. You know Psalm 23, God is my shepherd, I shall not lack. I know the shepherd. I know the shepherd. So it comes out differently. And it's true. Sometimes we have to know that the shepherd is there. We have to know the shepherd. He's there with us. He wouldn't give us a difficulty if we can't overcome it, as the Talmud states. Every difficulty, he's there with us to help us with the difficulty, but through the difficulty to also help us grow. As they say, what doesn't break you makes you stronger. But it's true with that acknowledgement that God is there. God is there to make us stronger. And that's one way of dealing with frustration or challenges in life altogether. The other way that we learn also from the story of Egypt is also based on this verse. And I want to read the reference itself, which will share this message too. Does anyone want to read? Julie, your turn. The top reference on page number 2 here. Please, go ahead. Right, and it's that last line that really speaks to the essence of it. To excavate deeper recesses of the soul. That's what hardships do. Very often, if we do tackle them, instead of fleeing from them, we do tackle them, recognizing that God is with us, then we'll force ourselves to find deeper treasures within us in order to be able to tackle these difficulties. Without these difficulties, we may be walking throughout life never knowing that we had these resources, these treasures. These difficulties forced us to dig deeper to find them. And that is the most divine thing that can happen. Why? Because when we start digging within ourselves, because of these difficulties, we'll very often find those divine treasures. We'll very often find that soul that carries those divine treasures. That unfortunately happens all too often because of these difficulties. And I do want to, I do want to mention another friend of mine who also He's 43 years old today, but he was on the verge of death just a few years ago. His name is Gershon, and he had this terrible type of cancer, and even the doctors gave up on him, but he fought through, excavating these resources within himself. And not only did he discover these treasures that really helped him overcome even the most dire predictions by doctors, but today he said to himself, this couldn't have happened just by coincidence. It probably happened because I have these treasures within me that I discovered throughout my disease that I now need to actualize. And he decided now every single Friday to go to cancer patients in the local hospital where he lives in Israel and to just lift their spirits by giving them candies and chocolates or whatever they may need, but mainly by telling them his own story, saying to them, look, I went through what you are going through. I was able to overcome it. I'm sure you'll be able to overcome it. When they see that living example, it gives those patients the greatest strength, the greatest comfort, and certainly the greatest hope they could have hoped for. And I think that this is really what this message is all about, that God gives us difficulties maybe in order for us to not just discover those treasures, but then to actualize them, to make them a life calling, make them a life purpose, something that could not have happened, unfortunately, without these difficulties. That's really what the story of Mitzrayim, of Egypt, of slavery is all about. God told us, you know what, you have pharaohs, but this is what is going to define you. Use that and make sure to actualize those treasures as you live on and as you continue to rebuild yourselves. I think that's why, we have these wonderful verses in Leviticus, for example, that says that be compassionate towards the slaves. Why? Because you were once a slave in Egypt. Be compassionate towards converts. Why? Because you were once converts in Egypt. Be compassionate towards... What God is really saying in these verses is that, look, don't ignore those treasures that you discovered within yourselves and then live life without them. You've discovered them. So use them. Use them to be a source of light, to be a beacon of hope for others around you. This is the blessing of every difficulty. Recognizing that hardships are divine, but once we find those treasures through those hardships, then we ourselves can become divine. Okay, so that's lesson number 3. We can go to lesson number 4 again, but I want to hear your comments. I don't want this to be just a monologue. Otherwise, we can move on. Okay, so that's lesson number 3. Lesson number 4, the final lesson for today, is living in the now. We learned that from the Haggadah of Passover. There's many, many tremendous verses and passages in Haggadah. By the way, I know that the Haggadah could be a gruesome exercise throughout the Passover Seder. Everyone has that Uncle Harry who goes on and on about the commentaries, right? You all have that uncle, or whatever it is, a cousin or something like that. Well, there's someone here in Scottsdale. I met with him the other day. It's interesting, but he composed what's called the 30-minute Haggadah. Have you heard of it before? You have it? Yeah, exactly. He composed it some 15 years ago, he said, and it's a hit. So I'm just wondering if this passage is in this 30-minute Haggadah. But nonetheless, every passage is worth exploring. This is one of the greatest passages because it teaches us yet another important lesson. Let's read the passage itself, which is based on this Talmudic line. Does anyone want to read Babylonian Talmud Yab Sachim 116a? From where should we begin to tell the story of Passover? Which is what the Haggadah is all about, telling the story of Passover. Does anyone want to read? Anyone? Let's reference here. Go ahead, Mini, please.
We should begin from our shameful beginning, but we should end with praise. God said we should begin with the verse, in the beginning our fathers were idolaters. But then we should bend it, and now God brought us close to the service.
All right, so this seems like a typical Talmudic argument. Where should we begin the story, telling the story from? One says we should begin from shameful beginnings, where our forefathers were idol worshippers, and that really is referring to the father of Abraham, right? Terach, who's an idol worshiper. That's where we should begin the story. Some say, no, why take us all the way there? Go forward and start from the story of Egypt, which of course makes also the Haggadah much shorter. I don't know where the 30-minute Haggadah begins. Maybe it begins even after that. Maybe that's the third opinion that the Talmud doesn't have. But who knows? But in any case, what are they really arguing about? And here there's another way, a beautiful interpretation. It's fine. No, you're the leader of the class, so you're allowed to do whatever you want. Oh, good. No, not at all. Not at all. Anyway, so it's a typical argument, but there's another way of reading it. Another way, which I think is just so beautiful and so powerful. Does anyone want to read this? But we can also read and translate the text as follows. So it takes the words of the text and really rephrases them so that its understanding changes. Does anyone want to read? Please, Sarah, go for it.
Follows. In the past, we served idols, but now God has brought us close to his service. Someone who lives in the past is to some degree in a state of idol worship. In contrast, someone living in the now is in a state of closeness to God.
Right. That's how they rephrase this, right? Let's just read it. Let's go back to the verse. In the past, so in other words, if you live in the past, we served idols. You like an idol worshiper. But going back to the verse itself. But if you live in the now, Akshav in Hebrew, God has brought us close to his service. Then you are one with God. If you live in the now, you're one with God. If you live in the past, you're an idol worshiper. That's how you can rephrase and reread this passage from the Haggadah. But what this truly means, and I think it really speaks about the story of Passover, that is that if you live in the past, again, if you're shackled by the troubles of your past that refrain you from appreciating the gifts of the present, then you're a slave, then you're an idol worshiper. But if you can release yourself from those shackles and really be appreciative of the blessings of the now, then you are free. Then you are one with God. I think that really summarizes in just one verse the entire story of Passover, the entire story of the Jewish people. We were slaves in Egypt for 210 years, but it's fascinating because we never dwelled on that slavery. It's interesting because if I were Moses, living in our modern day and age, facing a nation of slaves with 210 years of slavery, you know what I would have done? I would have said, hey, if you're a government like that, you would have said, hey, they're going to have some serious psychological traumas. Let's get a team of psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists to attend to them and let them dwell on their trauma. And I'm not saying that sometimes sometimes you do, sometimes really you need to, but that wasn't the focus. The focus was never the past. This nation was always forward oriented, rebuilding oriented. And I think, by the way, not to compare, because I don't think anything is comparable to this, but if we had to juxtapose, which is a better word, between the nation of slaves in Egypt and our nation, same nation, that experienced the horrors of the Holocaust, they have one thing in common. Beyond being completely murdered and butchered by evil, but they had one thing in common. They never looked back once they were done with that slavery, once done with that evil. These Holocaust survivors rebuilt themselves to the point that they even refused, so many of them, refused to say a word about their story. Sometimes it took them 20 years, 30 years, 40 years to open up their mouths. Why? I asked myself why. My theory is because, again, they too were forward focused. They want to rebuild themselves. It wasn't about the past. It was about living the present, actualizing the gifts of the moment, and ensuring that the next generation will have something to build itself on. That's what they did. And that just is so amazing to me, because very often in our day and age, we just focus, oh, I have a problem. Let me speak about it for the next 7 weeks. I have, this happened to me. This relationship it became sour. Oh, let me have it haunt me for the next 7 weeks. What about the present? What about now? Well, if we don't want to be idol worshippers, we got to get rid of the past. Yes, Mindy. Yeah. Right. So the forgiveness is a tool to be able to indeed live the present fully and to get rid of the past. Forgiveness is really what allows us let go and to enable to embrace the present moment. That's right. Absolutely. Yes.
So I'm wondering how like commemorating the past fits into living in the now. Because obviously one of the big points of Pesach is that we're telling the story of.
Very good. Right. Excellent. Because on the one, that's an excellent question, because indeed there's great emphasis on commemorating the past, on ensuring that we learn the lessons of the past also, that the past is not just locked up in a drawer and we forget about it. But I think that's where the fine line is.
Right.
There's a difference between commemorating and then learning the lessons so that it empowers the present, then between that and then sinking ourselves in the past, allowing the pain of the past to in a way overwhelm us and overcome us.
So it's like
right?
we're using the past, the memory of the past in service of the future.
Very good. Exactly. So that the past becomes a springboard for the future and not a downboard for the future, if there's such a word, right? A board that sinks us. That's correct. In other words, the only way we can look at the past, according to Judaism, is if we can learn from it and it makes us better, makes us grow. If we look at the past just so that we can be overwhelmed with pain and suffering and victimhood, then that's not the past that should be included in our memory, in our minds, and certainly in our lives. Yes, Hannah.
I was just gonna say, I'm a child of the Holocaust survivor.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents never spoke, and then my father passed away. I still don't know what happened to him during the war. But growing up with those two parents, I think first of all, they didn't want to tell us because they didn't want us to be hurt. They thought they would really.
That's another reason, right?
And
right.
pain us. And the other, I honestly believe that because my father never talked, I believe that he felt guilty for surviving. And and they completely lost, I mean, not hope, because there was Zionistic, they went to Israel, but it was very interesting. The other thing I want to say is, for some of you, a few years ago, we had the Violence of Hope.
Right.
The exhibit.
Right here, yeah.
I know, right here.
Yeah.
Right? And I got to know the guy the head of it, and we spoke, and he, I don't know if you guys know the story, but some of the violence, the Holocaust survivors wanted nothing to do with it. They wanted to move on because they just had such good memories. But then he collected, they have 80 violins now, and he collected all the violins, and they're opening in Chicago. I was in Chicago last week, and they're opening the Violins of Hope in Chicago, because he said, we've got to do the violins, we've got to play the violins, because that was from the Holocaust.
Very good.
Right.
So that's one way of using the past to empower the present. Right.
And so that's exactly what you were saying.
Right.
We're moving on.
Yeah.
Even though.
That's
who
right.
knows what these people,
That's right. Very good. Very good. I think that's the difference between. I think that's how we fine tune this message. We have to learn from the past, not live in the past, and that's the main difference here. Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Anyhow, so one tool is forgiveness. Indeed, forgiving is maybe the most redeeming and releasing tool that one can use in order to not be drowned by the past. But then there's another tool also, and I would encourage everyone to say these words every morning. We say it in a way in the Modalni prayer as soon as we wake up. We recognize that God has given us a new day, restored our soul, and he has faith in us. And then there's another prayer also in the morning prayers and the daily morning prayers, in which we say that in his grace, he renews every single day consistently the work of the creation. God renews every single day. Every single day is a new day. And that's yet another tool, recognizing that today we have a newness that did not exist yesterday, that today we are recreated. There's a great French existentialist by the name of Jean-Paul Sartre, who would say that people are not revived. That he would say that we don't live a new day every day, we are revived every day. And there's a difference, because when you recognize that you are revived, you are given a new life. If you're given a new life, that means you have a new, fresh perspective. That means you have new blessings today. That means you have a whole new perspective that you did not have yesterday. And that is really what this prayer is all about, recognizing that God is giving us something so new. And if we are living in the past, we won't be able to celebrate this newness and certainly to live it. That's another tool. A third tool is maybe not so much forgiveness and not so much recognizing that everything is new and we have to appreciate the newness by living that moment. But also that third tool also comes from the daily prayers. We've mentioned this prayer in the past, but it's one of my favorite prayers. It's a prayer that we say each and every day before we go to sleep. Just before we say the bedtime Shema, there's the prayer of letting go. It was composed by Rabbi Luria, one of the foremost Kabbalists of Tzfat, of 400 years ago, in which he writes as follows. Does anyone want to read this prayer? We can then dwell on it a little bit and wrap it up. Master of the universe. Anyone? Please, Janet. Or Judy. Whoever. Yeah. Go for it. Go. I hereby. Yeah.
Sorry, Master of the universe, I hereby forgive everyone who has angered or antagonized me or has sinned against me, whether against my body, my property, my honor, or against anything of mine, whether he did so accidentally, willfully, carelessly, or purposely, whether through speech, deed, thought, or note, and whether in this transmigration or another transmigration, I forgive every Jew and every person. May no one be punished because of me. May it be your will, Hashem, my God and the God of my forefathers, that I may sin no more, and whatever sins I have done before you, may you blot out in your abundant mercies, but not through suffering or bad illnesses. Please, may the expressions of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart find favor before you, Hashem, my rock and my redeemer.
Right. So this is really, I think, one of the most important prayers, because what it does is that it enables us to get rid of any toxicity within. To say to ourselves, you know what? Anything that may have affected me throughout the day, I'm letting go. Because if I go to sleep with this toxicity, I'm going to wake up with that toxicity. So I have to let it go before going to sleep. Like this, I wake up really as a new person. You know, I follow news in certain parts of the world because I have some emotional connection to them. Israel, certainly. America, of course. One of those parts is France. France right now, as we speak, there's a garbage strike. And if you're following this, the country is going up in flames because Macron did something and he used, some people say, abused his power, whatever it is. But I'm reading about this garbage strike. And people are upset because, of course, it's stinking up all these streets in France. And I'm saying to myself, wow, that's interesting. Because it upsets us when there's a garbage strike, when there's garbage, collected and not being thrown away in the streets of our world. How about the garbage being collected in here? We don't have the same reaction. But very often we amass garbage, becomes toxic. It stinks and we don't even realize it. What this prayer does is that it takes this garbage and ends the strike. It throws it away and enables us to remain fresh and toxicity free. That's really what this is about. The Jewish people understood that if they were carrying this grudge towards the Egyptians, even when they were free, they could really never become free. They had to let go of this grudge, and then they could say, hello, freedom. If you can't let go of this, if you can't say goodbye, hatred, you'll never be able to say hello, freedom. And that's yet a third tool. First tool is forgiveness. This is not so much forgiveness. I'm not necessarily forgiving. I'm just letting go. Second tool is recognizing that today is a new day and therefore I have to embrace that newness. But again, this tool I think is the easiest to exercise because I'm simply saying I'm not giving this thought. This is bothering me. I'm not focusing on it. Goodbye. It's not a part of my essence. It's not a part of my life altogether. I'm letting go. I just came back from South Africa, as I was saying, where we married off, they say, our oldest son. And the hero of South Africa, of course, is Nelson Mandela. Wherever you go at the airport, you have a big idol, a big statue of Nelson Mandela, you have his quotes everywhere. One of his famous quotes is when they asked him, after he was released from jail after 27 years, Robben Island, in complete isolation, when they asked him, so, do you not carry any resentment, any grudges towards the people who imprisoned you so wrongfully for 27 years in such torturous ways? And he responded, no. I asked him why. And he said, because resentment is like drinking a poison and hoping that your enemy dies from it. Resentment is so toxic that you're the one dying from that poison. You think your enemy's gonna, it's you. Whereas they say hatred hurts the hater the most. And this is so true. And this is really one of the great lessons. The nation of Israel understood that. They got to let go of that resentment. They got to let go of hatred. They got to let go of all these negativities. And then they can truly be free. And this is really what this fourth lesson is all about. We live in the now by letting go of the toxicity of the past.